It was a cool autumn afternoon in suburban Crestwood when the normally quiet cul-de-sac suddenly erupted with tension. Karen Miller, a middle-aged woman known around the neighborhood for her self-assured manner and narrow views, was tending to her perfectly trimmed lawn when she noticed something she considered an outrageous affront. Across the street, on a modest yet well-kept driveway, a black man named Devin Harris was methodically closing the gate to his driveway. Karen's eyes narrowed as she watched him. To her, this simple act seemed to defy her deeply held beliefs about how things should be done in Crestwood. Without pausing to consider any context, Karen whipped out her cell phone and dialed 911. In a voice trembling with indignation, she reported, "There's a black man closing his own driveway over there. I don't think that's allowed." Her tone dripped with a self-righteous certainty that she was defending proper order. As she spoke, a small crowd of neighbors began to gather near her well-manicured lawn, murmuring in agreement with her complaint. Karen was convinced she was upholding the social norms of Crestwood, a community she believed must adhere to a strict traditional order. On the other side of the street, Devin Harris was completely absorbed in the task of securing his property. A proud homeowner and a meticulous man, Devin had spent months renovating his modest house. His driveway gate, which he had installed for both security and privacy, was closing just as he had planned. Unaware of the uproar unfolding across the street, he worked calmly and efficiently. But as the 911 call reverberated through the local dispatch system, something unexpected happened. Within minutes, police cruisers arrived, and officers began to investigate the disturbance. As Karen watched with a smug expression, she assumed that justice was being served. However, what unfolded next was far beyond anything she could have imagined. The responding officer, after a brief conversation with Devin, discovered a surprising twist, one that would expose a hidden truth about the man she had so hastily condemned. In that charged moment, the seeds of retribution were sown. Karen's call, made without understanding or compassion, was about to come back to haunt her. Unbeknownst to her, the investigation would reveal that Devin's simple act was not an act of defiance, but a necessary step to protect something far more significant. The stage was set for a dramatic reversal, one that would force Karen to confront the very prejudice she had assumed was justified. As the afternoon light dimmed and neighbors whispered among themselves, the unexpected consequences of a call made in ignorance were poised to upend Crestwood's carefully maintained facade. Crestwood was the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was pristine, every house painted in tasteful hues, and every resident was expected to adhere to an unspoken code of decorum. Tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, the community prided itself on its long-standing traditions and a sense of order that had been passed down through generations. The streets were lined with mature trees, and each driveway was more than just a passage. It was a symbol of personal pride and community standing. Karen Miller, a lifelong resident of Crestwood, was well known among her neighbors. In her early 50s, with neatly styled hair and an ever-present look of stern authority, she had built her reputation as someone who took it upon herself to keep things in order. Whether it was calling the neighborhood watch over minor disturbances or scrutinizing the appearance of others, Karen believed she was the guardian of Crestwood's values. To her, any deviation from a norm was not only unwelcome, but an outright insult to the traditions she held dear. Opposite Karen's meticulously maintained home was a modest property owned by Devin Harris. A proud black man in his late 40s, Devin had moved to Crestwood a few years ago, determined to build a better life for himself and his family. He worked hard, renovating his home piece by piece, and his driveway gate was the latest project, a sturdy, automated system designed to provide both security and privacy. Devin's quiet diligence and the pride he took in his property stood in stark contrast to the rigid attitudes of some of Crestwood's older residents. The neighborhood itself was a blend of old and new. While many families had lived there for decades, recent years had seen an influx of newcomers, people of diverse backgrounds who brought fresh ideas and perspectives. This evolving dynamic, however, was met with resistance by those like Karen, who feared that change might erode the established order. On that autumn day, as the warm sunlight danced through the leaves and children played along the sidewalks, the stage was set for an incident that would ignite long-simmering tensions. The park across the street was alive with activity. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, and the air was filled with the subtle scent of freshly mowed grass and blooming flowers. In this idyllic setting, the actions of a single individual could disrupt the fragile harmony that had defined Crestwood for so long. Devin, focused on ensuring his driveway gate closed smoothly, was entirely unaware of the brewing storm. His mind was on the work ahead and the small moments of progress that meant so much to him. Yet across the street, Karen's eyes caught every movement, and her long-held prejudices stirred into action. When she dialed 911, she did so with the conviction that she was protecting the values of her community. As the police cruisers arrived and the situation began to unfold, the contrast between the two worlds became undeniable. The elegance and order of Crestwood were challenged by the honest, hard-working spirit of a man determined to secure his home and his dignity. In that moment, as whispers of discontent spread among the gathered neighbors, the seeds of change were being sown. The neighborhood, once defined by its rigid adherence to tradition, was about to confront the complexities of a changing world, where prejudice would no longer be tolerated without consequence. Within minutes of Karen's impassioned 911 call, the normally placid streets of Crestwood became a battleground of conflicting ideals. The responding officer, Officer Samuel Wright, pulled his cruiser to the curb near Devin's property. With a calm professionalism that contrasted sharply with the charged atmosphere, he approached the driveway gate just as Devin was finishing his routine closing procedure. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment?" Officer Wright asked politely, though his tone carried an undercurrent of caution. Devin, ever respectful yet assertive, stepped away from the gate and greeted the officer with a firm handshake. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" he inquired. Before Devin could reply, a small group of neighbors who had gathered nearby began to murmur. Some had heard Karen's tirade and watched as she stood in her perfectly kept yard, phone still pressed to her ear, her expression a mixture of anger and self-righteousness. "She's calling 911 over this?" One neighbor whispered, disbelief in his tone. Others exchanged disapproving glances, their loyalty to Crestwood's old ways challenged by this sudden incident. As Officer Wright listened to Devin's calm explanation of what had happened, he began to suspect that the situation was more nuanced than Karen's one-sided account. The officer asked a few routine questions, and Devin's steady responses painted a picture of a man simply tending to his property. But then, as Wright examined the security camera footage from the street, a camera installed by a local homeowner, the true nature of the incident began to emerge. The footage showed a quiet, unremarkable scene. Devin methodically closing his automated driveway gate, checking to ensure everything was secure. There was nothing out of the ordinary about his actions, until the camera panned briefly to capture Karen's enraged face as she dialed 911, her eyes darting back and forth between her phone and Devin's property. Her voice, recorded in hushed, angry tones, repeated her false claim that the act was an attempt to disrupt the order of the neighborhood. As news of the footage spread among the onlookers and began to circulate on social media, a sharp division emerged within the community. Many who had once admired Karen's insistence on order now questioned the fairness of her judgment. "It looks like he was just doing what he needed to do to secure his home," one witness remarked, her voice tinged with surprise. "Why would someone call the police for that?" Others, however, remained entrenched in their beliefs, unwilling to accept that the simple act of closing a driveway could be so misinterpreted. The internal conflict grew more intense when local community leaders and civil rights activists began to speak out. A respected neighborhood council member, who had long advocated for inclusivity and understanding, took to social media to condemn Karen's actions. "Our community should be about unity, not division," he posted, urging residents to look beyond superficial differences and embrace the true spirit of Crestwood. His message resonated widely, drawing support from younger families and those who had experienced discrimination firsthand. Meanwhile, Officer Wright continued to document every detail of the investigation. He recorded witness statements, secured digital footage from the security cameras, and made careful notes about the timeline of events. Every piece of evidence was slowly building a case that contradicted Karen's original prejudiced account. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Devon's actions were entirely reasonable and that Karen's call had been driven by a deep-seated bias rather than any genuine disturbance. By the close of the day, the incident had transformed from a simple misunderstanding into a symbol of the broader social issues at play in Crestwood. The story of a black man simply securing his property, and an elderly woman's misguided attempt to police what she considered proper, had ignited a debate about fairness, respect, and the responsibility of community members to uphold values that embraced rather than excluded. Every whispered conversation among neighbors, every video clip shared online, added to the growing chorus demanding accountability. The conflict buildup was complete. A scenario that began as an ordinary act of home maintenance had been twisted into an incident of racial injustice by one woman's prejudice. And now, as the digital evidence piled up and public sentiment shifted, the stage was set for the dramatic escalation that would force Crestwood to confront its own shortcomings and, ultimately, for the truth to reclaim its rightful place. In the days following the 911 call, Crestwood was engulfed in a maelstrom of controversy and public debate. Social media exploded with outrage as video clips and snapshots of the incident were shared widely. Hashtags like #JusticeForDevon and #CrestwoodUnity trended, drawing attention from local news outlets and civil rights organizations. The narrative that had begun with an angry phone call now evolved into a powerful statement about bias, injustice, and the importance of understanding. Within the Crestwood community, heated discussions broke out at neighborhood meetings, in local cafes, and online. Many residents, particularly younger families and individuals who had experienced similar forms of discrimination, rallied behind Devon's side of the story. He was just doing what any responsible homeowner would do, one comment read. We need to stand up against hate, no matter where it comes from. At the same time, a vocal minority defended Karen's actions, arguing that traditions must be maintained. This deep divide underscored the tension that had been simmering for years beneath the surface of this seemingly tranquil community. Local activists organized peaceful protests outside Karen Miller's home and at the community center, demanding that bias and hate have no place in Crestwood. Signs with messages like "Our homes, our rights," and "Unity over prejudice" were held high as speakers called for reforms in how community concerns were addressed. Town hall meetings quickly became forums for intense debate, with local leaders urging residents to look past superficial differences and focus on the values of respect and inclusion. Within the police department, the internal investigation into Karen's call gained momentum. Officer Samuel Wright, who had been meticulous in gathering digital evidence, presented his findings to a panel of senior officers. The evidence, video footage, witness testimonies, and digital logs, painted an irrefutable picture of a misunderstanding fueled by deep-seated bias. The internal affairs team, spurred by mounting public pressure, promised that every complaint of discriminatory behavior would now be taken seriously, and that no one in Crestwood would be allowed to use prejudice as an excuse for harassment. Meanwhile, as the investigation unfolded, Karen Miller found herself increasingly isolated. Neighbors who had once admired her staunch defense of order now whispered about her behavior in hushed, disapproving tones. Social media posts began to surface, recounting past incidents where Karen had made similarly biased calls, and the public sentiment quickly turned against her. It seems like she's been carrying this hate for years, one post read. Today, the truth is finally coming to light. At the same time, Devon Harris, whose simple act of closing his driveway had been twisted into an act of supposed misconduct, began to receive messages of support from across the city. Local community centers and advocacy groups invited him to speak about the importance of standing up for one's rights and the need to challenge outdated prejudices. His calm dignity in the face of unwarranted aggression turned him into a symbol of resilience and integrity, a living reminder that everyday acts of responsibility should be celebrated, not condemned. The mounting evidence and public outcry forced local government officials to take notice. In a special session of the City Council, members debated over proposed measures to review and reform emergency response protocols, ensuring that 911 calls could not be misused to target individuals based on race or personal bias. The discussion was fierce and impassioned, one that reflected not only the anger of the moment, but also a long-overdue recognition that systemic change was necessary. As the pressure mounted from all sides, through digital evidence, passionate public speeches, and internal accountability, the stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. Every shared video clip, every supportive message from the community, and every tear shed by those who had witnessed the incident added to a growing chorus that demanded justice. The narrative had shifted. What began as an angry, misguided call was now a catalyst for change, a turning point that would force every member of Crestwood to re-examine their values and stand up against hate. By the end of this turbulent period, it was clear that the incident had become more than just a dispute over a driveway. It had morphed into a symbol of the struggle for equality, respect, and truth in a community grappling with the forces of prejudice. The rising tension promised that the final act was near, a moment when the long-buried truths would come to light, and when the deep-rooted biases that had plagued Crestwood for decades would be exposed to the full force of public accountability. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in a packed conference room at the Crestwood Community Center. Senior city officials, local police representatives, community leaders, and media gathered to hear the final resolution of the investigation into the 911 call. With a quiet determination and a solemn gaze, the city council chair, Ms. Linda Harper, stepped to the podium. After a thorough review of all available digital records, eyewitness testimonies, and internal complaint logs, we have reached an incontrovertible conclusion. Harper began, her voice steady and commanding. It is clear that the call made by Mrs. Karen Miller was not only based on unfounded assumptions, but it was also an act of deep-seated prejudice that has no place in our community. Her words echoed through the silent room, leaving no doubt as to the gravity of the situation. Harper continued, effective immediately, Mrs. Miller's history of discriminatory 911 calls will be subject to a full disciplinary review, and appropriate actions will be taken to ensure that such hate is not tolerated in Crestwood. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. For many, this was a long-awaited moment, a declaration that the time for unchecked bias was over. At that moment, a representative for the family at the center of the incident, Tasha Reed, the black mother who had been unjustly targeted, rose to speak. "I stand here today, not in anger, but in hope," she said, her voice calm yet resolute. "Our lives are defined not by the hate thrown at us, but by the strength with which we rise above it. Let this be a turning point, a day when our community chooses unity over division." Her words, simple and powerful, were met with a wave of applause from everyone present. Following Tasha's heartfelt declaration, a senior police official took the stage to present the final dossier, a comprehensive record that included digital footage, internal logs, and multiple eyewitness accounts documenting Mrs. Miller's repeated instances of biased behavior. Every piece of evidence confirmed what the community had long suspected, that this was not an isolated incident, but a pattern of discrimination that had festered unchecked for far too long. The turning point was sealed with a unanimous vote by the City Council and Community Oversight Committee. The decision to subject Mrs. Miller to rigorous disciplinary action was not just about punishment. It was a bold statement that Crestwood would no longer allow prejudice to dictate how its citizens were treated. The shock on the faces of those who had once defended her was visible, and even some of the more skeptical voices in the room could not deny the force of the evidence. In that charged moment, as the final announcement was made, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense anticipation to a determined resolve. The balance of power had irrevocably changed. The voices of those who had suffered in silence were finally heard, and the call for accountability resonated with every person present. It was a watershed moment, a turning point that promised not only to reshape the future of Crestwood, but also to serve as a lasting reminder that no one's prejudice could remain hidden forever. In the weeks that followed the dramatic decision, Crestwood began a slow process of healing and transformation. News of the disciplinary review into Mrs. Karen Miller's repeated bias calls spread rapidly, igniting passionate discussions about accountability and the need for systemic change in the community. Local newspapers and social media buzzed with stories of resilience, as many hailed the verdict as a turning point in the fight against prejudice. Tasha Reed, the family at the heart of the incident, emerged as a symbol of quiet strength and dignity. Invited to speak at community forums and local gatherings, she shared her story with grace, emphasizing that the values of unity and respect were more important than the narrow-minded judgments of a few. "We rise above hate when we stand together," she said at one public meeting, her words resonating with hope and determination. Meanwhile, city officials and community leaders launched initiatives aimed at ensuring that no further acts of discrimination would go unchecked. New training programs for emergency responders and stricter guidelines for the use of 911 were implemented, with regular reviews to guarantee transparency and accountability. "Our community must be a safe haven for all," declared Councilwoman Rebecca Turner at a town hall meeting. Her impassioned speech reinforced the idea that every resident deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their background. Within Crestwood, the incident sparked a broader cultural shift. Long-held prejudices were openly challenged in neighborhood meetings, and educational workshops were organized to promote understanding and inclusivity. The once divisive issues that had plagued the community began to be discussed with newfound candor and a commitment to reconciliation. "Our strength lies in our ability to learn from our mistakes," one local activist remarked during a public rally. "When we confront our biases, we pave the way for a brighter, more inclusive future." As the investigation's findings were formally released, the community saw tangible evidence that change was underway. The comprehensive dossier detailed every instance of discriminatory behavior, serving not only as a record of past injustice, but also as a blueprint for future reforms. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Neighbors, local businesses, and even schools began to integrate the lessons learned from the incident into their own practices, ensuring that the legacy of that day would drive lasting transformation. At a final, symbolic gathering held in the central plaza of Crestwood, community leaders and police representatives joined forces to celebrate the progress made. Under the soft glow of the evening sky, a large banner reading "Unity over Prejudice" was unfurled, and speeches of hope and accountability filled the air. "Today, we turn a painful chapter into a promise for tomorrow," said one speaker, his voice echoing among the gathered crowd. "Our community is stronger when every voice is heard and every act of hate is met with justice." By the time the sun set on that historic day, Crestwood had taken its first definitive steps toward a future defined by compassion and understanding. The disciplinary action against Mrs. Karen Miller, once a source of division and shame, had become a catalyst for systemic change, a reminder that no act of prejudice could ever go unchallenged. The community, united by its shared commitment to fairness, looked forward to a new era where every individual was valued and respected. In the end, the story of that fateful call and its aftermath served as a powerful testament to the transformative power of accountability. It reminded everyone that while ignorance and hate may cast long shadows, the light of truth and unity can ultimately dispel even the darkest prejudices. Crestwood emerged from the ordeal stronger, its people more aware and more determined than ever to build a future where justice is not merely a promise, but a living, breathing reality.